The smoke was thick, curling through the broken streets like living shadows. Shells slammed into the buildings around them, sending dust and glass raining down. Amid the chaos, a voice barely older than a whisper rose above the roar of battle. "Someone take command, or we're all dead." No one moved. The officers had fallen. Soldiers were pinned, frozen with fear. And yet from the rubble, a 16-year-old boy stepped forward, clutching a rifle that was almost as tall as he was. In the next 12 minutes, his decisions would save hundreds of lives and leave the enemy stunned. But who was this boy? How did someone so young come to lead men in the middle of a losing battle? And why had history almost forgotten him? The war had been raging for years. Europe was a continent ablaze, cities reduced to rubble, and young men sent into battle with little more than courage and training. By mid-1944, the front lines were fluid, chaotic. Every day, towns changed hands, and the line between life and death grew thinner with every shell and every shot. In one small village on the Western Front, a platoon of soldiers was retreating under a sudden, overwhelming attack. The commander, a seasoned officer, had been killed in the opening minutes, leaving the unit leaderless. Panic spread faster than bullets. Confusion and fear threatened to unravel the entire defense. It was in this moment of near-total collapse that a 16-year-old boy named Lukas Schneider, a volunteer from a neighboring town, realized no one else would act. He had been with the unit only weeks, sent to deliver messages and carry supplies far from the front lines. Yet here he was, staring at the crumbling defensive line, aware that every second of hesitation meant death. Lukas had grown up in the shadow of war. He had watched older brothers and neighbors march off to fight, some returning in pieces, others never returning at all. The boy had learned quickly how to move silently, how to read the signs of danger, and how to keep calm when everything around him erupted into chaos. But nothing had prepared him for the moment when he would become the last line between survival and annihilation. The enemy was closing in. Mortar fire hammered the outskirts of the village. Machine guns ripped through barricades. Soldiers shouted over the din, trying to regroup, but fear held them frozen. Lukas ran from cover to cover, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Form up, on me, don't break." For 12 minutes, he directed the men as if he had been leading them his entire life. Every decision, from positioning a machine gun to calling for suppressive fire, was executed with uncanny precision. His youth did not make him reckless, it made him relentless. He moved faster, thought faster, and acted when everyone else hesitated. By the time reinforcements arrived, the tide had turned. The platoon, once on the brink of defeat, had held their position. Casualties were high, but far fewer than expected. The enemy was pushed back. Lukas' courage, decisiveness, and calm under pressure had rewritten the outcome of the battle, and the memory of those 12 minutes would stay with everyone who witnessed it. Yet even in the aftermath, questions lingered. How had a boy managed what seasoned soldiers could not? What drove him to act when others froze? And what did this moment reveal about the extraordinary capacity of youth in the crucible of war? This was only the beginning of Lukas Schneider's story, a story that would test the limits of courage, demand impossible sacrifices, and shine a light on the hidden heroes history almost forgot. Before the roar of battle reached the village, Lukas Schneider was just another boy caught in the machinery of war. Born in 1928 in a small German border town, he had known conflict not as a distant headline, but as an ever-present shadow over daily life. The air smelled of coal smoke and fear. The streets whispered of missing fathers and absent brothers. From the age of 12, Lukas had been tasked with helping his mother and younger siblings survive the war's scarcity. He delivered messages, ran errands, and learned the rhythm of obedience and caution in a world that demanded both. By 14, he could navigate ruined streets with the instinct of a soldier, avoiding patrols, knowing which roads were mined, which paths were safe enough to cross. He had learned early that life depended on observation, timing, and the courage to act when others hesitated. When the army came calling for volunteers, Lukas, like many teenagers of his generation, lied about his age. He didn't do it out of patriotism, he did it out of necessity. War was all-consuming. Survival required participation, not observation. Assigned to the supply division, he carried messages, transporting ammunition, and observed the front lines from a distance. He was meant to be peripheral, invisible, unnoticed. But that day, the battle reached him. The platoon's position in the village was a critical choke point. If it fell, the enemy would sweep through the valley and threaten the main defensive line. The village itself, with its narrow cobblestone streets and shattered homes, became a maze of fear and potential death. Soldiers ducked behind walls, barrels, and overturned carts as explosions shook the ground, and smoke filled the air like a suffocating fog. At first, Lucas tried to stay out of sight, clutching his rifle and watching the adults make tactical decisions. But the officers, confident yet complacent, underestimated the enemy's advance. Within minutes, the unit's commander, a man in his 40s with years of frontline experience, was killed by artillery shrapnel. The next in line hesitated. The squad was paralyzed, their fear almost tangible, their confusion complete. Lucas could see it. The line was breaking. He could see the terror in the soldiers' eyes, and he could feel the weight of the moment pressing on his chest, a force heavier than any shell. Something inside him snapped. He stepped from the shadows, his voice small but sharp, cutting through the chaos. "Form up on me now." No one moved at first. Some laughed nervously, some shook their heads, thinking it impossible that a boy could command them. But Lucas would not relent. He ran forward, positioning the men, assigning each a sector of fire, directing cover, and spotting weak points in the enemy's advance. Every second was a battle against panic. Every command was a gamble. His hands shook, but his eyes remained fixed on the approaching enemy. Bullets whizzed past him. Explosions ripped through the air. In those first frantic moments, Lucas became more than a boy. He became a focal point of courage, a spark that ignited action in the hearts of men trained to fight. The 12 minutes that followed were a blur of motion and sound. He moved faster than most adults could think. He reassigned soldiers when their positions were overrun. He grabbed grenades and threw them himself when a machine gun nest threatened to break the line. He shouted warnings over gunfire and shouted encouragement to terrified soldiers whose hands trembled. And yet, amidst the chaos, he never lost sight of the human cost. Every decision carried weight. Every order risked life. He knew that one wrong step could turn survival into slaughter, but hesitation was not an option. As the enemy pressed forward, Lucas' leadership began to show results. Men who had frozen began firing again. Positions that seemed lost were held. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the tide shifted. The first shell hit at 14:03, tearing through a building on the eastern edge of the village and sending a plume of brick and dust into the sky. Men screamed. Horses bolted from the stables. Smoke turned the sun into a dull, sickly orange. Lucas Schneider was already running, rifle in hand, toward the broken line. The platoon had no time to reorganize. The enemy had advanced faster than anyone anticipated. Soldiers froze, glancing at each other in panic, unsure where to take cover or which way to fire. In that moment, Lucas did what no one expected. He assumed control. "Listen to me, hold the street, hold the street." His voice was small, almost fragile, yet it carried authority. Some men glanced at him incredulously, but the urgency in his eyes left no room for doubt. He sprinted to a partially destroyed wall, ducked behind it, and peered down the street. He saw a squad of enemy soldiers trying to flank them through a ruined archway. Without hesitation, he grabbed a nearby soldier's rifle and fired a warning shot, then pointed to the wall opposite. "Move, cover the archway, now." It was astonishing how quickly his orders were obeyed. Fear, which had frozen the men moments ago, now became coordinated action. One soldier, a young man barely older than Lucas, hesitated, and Lucas barked, "You either fight or you die, choose now." The soldier obeyed. Minutes stretched like hours. Bullets shredded the air. A mortar round landed just 30 feet away, throwing Lucas to the ground, his ears ringing. When the smoke cleared, he saw two soldiers pinned behind debris, unable to fire. Without thinking, he ran across the open street, dragging them to safety under a hail of gunfire. Every decision mattered. Every step could be his last. When a machine gun nest opened fire on the center of their line, Lucas directed a small group of soldiers to flank it. He even picked up a grenade himself, tossing it with uncanny precision, silencing the gun and saving dozens of men. Time became distorted. Lucas had no sense of how long he had been in command. Every instinct, every fragment of knowledge from years of observation and preparation guided him. He moved from one hot spot to another, repositioning troops, patching gaps, calming terrified men. At one point, the enemy almost broke through a barricade. Lucas ran forward, waving his arms, shouting, "Stand your ground, do not let them pass." A volley of rifle fire followed. The enemy faltered. The line held. By the 10th minute, the platoon had regained its footing. What had been a chaotic, hopeless defense had transformed into a coordinated stand. Soldiers were still terrified, but now they were firing with purpose. The enemy hesitated, confused by the sudden resistance from a line they had thought broken. Then, at minute 12, the first reinforcements arrived. Fresh soldiers poured into the village, securing flanks and pressing the advantage. The immediate threat was neutralized. The enemy, battered and bewildered, began to retreat. Lucas sank to the ground, exhausted. His hands were blistered, his uniform torn, his face streaked with dirt and blood. Around him, men looked at him with a mixture of disbelief, awe, and gratitude. The 16-year-old boy had done what trained soldiers could not. He had turned imminent defeat into a narrow, improbable victory. But the aftermath was sobering. Casualties were high. Friends had died beside him. Buildings were destroyed. And yet, in the midst of destruction, something remarkable had emerged. A testament to courage, clarity, and the unimaginable potential of youth. The battle was over, but the echoes of gunfire lingered in every corner of the shattered village. Smoke curled from rooftops, and the ground was littered with the remnants of a fight that had seemed destined for total disaster. Soldiers wandered through the debris, searching for friends, counting bodies, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Lucas Schneider sat on the curb of a destroyed building, his rifle resting across his knees. His chest heaved, his hands shook, and the world felt impossibly heavy. The adrenaline that had carried him through the chaos had faded, leaving him with a clarity that was almost unbearable. Around him, men who had once doubted him now looked at him with awe, but also with the haunting knowledge that each decision he had made had been a matter of life and death. Officers arrived soon after, inspecting the line, giving orders, and assessing casualties. When they reached Lucas, some of them hesitated. How could they acknowledge the heroism of a 16-year-old boy? Military protocol dictated a hierarchy, and a volunteer messenger was not supposed to assume command. Yet the truth of the moment could not be denied. Men testified to his leadership, describing how his voice had rallied them, how his decisions had prevented catastrophe. Despite this, recognition was complicated. Lucas received a quiet nod of respect from a few officers, a mention in a dispatch buried among reports of strategic maneuvers elsewhere. There was no public fanfare, no medal ceremony with drums and flags. War, after all, did not pause to celebrate the courage of a boy. But in the hearts of the men he had led, Lucas became a symbol of something rare and extraordinary: bravery, decisiveness, and the power of one person to alter the course of events against impossible odds. The personal cost weighed heavily. Survivors spoke of the fear, the constant presence of death, the terror of seeing friends fall while they themselves lived. Lucas carried guilt alongside pride. He could not forget the faces of the men he could not save, nor the moments when he had to force others into danger. At 16, he had been thrust into a responsibility most adults could not endure, and it left scars that would last a lifetime. In the weeks that followed, Lucas returned to duties far from the front lines, but the experience had changed him irreversibly. His friends noticed a solemnity in his eyes, a quiet understanding that war spared no one. Yet in the quiet moments, he also felt a fierce confidence born from surviving the impossible. He had stared into chaos and emerged, if not unscathed, then undeniably transformed. Historians who later pieced together accounts of the battle would marvel at the improbability of it. A 16-year-old boy leading men in combat, holding a line against seasoned soldiers, turning what seemed certain defeat into survival. It was almost mythic in its improbability. Yet it was real. Each decision, each command, each act of courage had been documented in the recollections of those who had fought beside him. Even decades later, Lucas' story resonates. It is not just a tale of tactical brilliance or battlefield heroics. It is a story of human resilience, of the extraordinary courage that can emerge from the most unexpected places, and of the heavy, unspoken cost of war on young lives. The guns fell silent, but the war did not end for Lucas Schneider. The village he had defended was a ghost of its former self, charred ruins, collapsed roofs, and empty streets where laughter had once lived. For a boy who had been 16 when he held a line that could have crumbled, life after the battle was an uneasy mixture of relief, grief, and disorientation. He returned to his hometown, but the familiar streets felt foreign. Friends who had gone to the front were gone forever, and those who survived carried scars of their own. Lucas found himself haunted not by the enemy's bullets, but by the faces of the men he had commanded, some of whom had survived because of him, others who had died in spite of his best efforts. Each memory was a quiet reminder of the fragile thread upon which life hung during those 12 minutes. Yet in the shadow of devastation, Lucas began to rebuild. He took on ordinary jobs, tried to recapture a sense of normalcy, and worked to support his family. But the story of the 16-year-old who had commanded soldiers in a life-or-death situation never left him. Every conversation, every reunion carried the weight of that day. He was no longer just a boy, yet the boy he had been, the one who had faced impossible odds, remained alive in memory and spirit. Historians later pieced together his heroics from testimonies, letters, and obscure military dispatches. Few publications celebrated his name widely, few awards ever came, but those who had survived because of his quick thinking remembered him vividly. Veterans spoke in hushed tones about the boy who had taken charge when adults faltered, a symbol of courage that transcended age, training, and expectation. Lucas' story also posed a broader reflection on the human cost of war. It forced people to consider how youth, so often shielded from the harshest realities, was thrust into impossible situations. What does it mean for a 16-year-old to shoulder the lives of grown men, to make split-second decisions that decide survival or death? How do those experiences shape a person, and what burdens remain invisible to the world? In later years, Lucas rarely spoke of the battle. When he did, his tone was calm, almost clinical, but those closest to him sensed the weight behind his words. Courage, he seemed to suggest, is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Leadership is not granted by age or rank. It is forged in moments when hesitation is more dangerous than action. And heroism, he understood, is often recognized long after the fact, if at all. Today, the village where Lucas made his stand is quiet, a peaceful town that belies the chaos of its past. Yet the story survives in the memories of those who witnessed it, in historical accounts pieced together decades later, and in the enduring lesson that courage can emerge from the most unexpected places, even from a 16-year-old boy facing the abyss of war. The 12 minutes that defined Lucas Schneider's life were brief, but their impact was eternal. They remind us that history is not only shaped by generals and kings, but by ordinary individuals thrust into extraordinary circumstances. And sometimes, the youngest among us, overlooked by age and expectation, are the ones who rise to meet the impossible. The 12 minutes Lucas Schneider commanded a platoon may have seemed like a single, isolated event. But in the larger tapestry of World War II, it represented a recurring truth. Youth were often thrust into roles that demanded courage far beyond their years. Across Europe, in towns and forests, in the rubble of bombed cities, teenagers acted decisively in moments that would determine life, death, and even the outcome of entire skirmishes. Strategically, the village Lucas defended occupied a critical point in the line of retreat. Had it fallen, enemy forces would have surged into the valley, threatening the supply routes for several divisions and potentially altering the outcome of a larger campaign. Military historians analyzing reports decades later noted that Lucas' intervention prevented what could have been a domino effect of retreat, collapse, and unnecessary casualties. His 12 minutes of leadership bought time for reinforcements to arrive, time for the line to hold, time for the army to reorganize. But beyond maps and strategic assessments lies the human story. Letters written by surviving soldiers recall the disbelief they felt when a boy, barely in his teens, commanded them under fire. They remembered his voice cutting through chaos, the clarity of his orders, and the composure that seemed impossible for someone so young. For many, Lucas became a legend, a symbol of the human capacity to rise above fear, to act when hesitation could mean annihilation. Lucas' experience was far from unique. Across Europe, other teenagers displayed extraordinary courage during the war, often in equally harrowing circumstances. Some, like 15-year-old resistance fighters in occupied France, carried vital intelligence across enemy lines. Others, like orphan boys in Eastern Europe, guided entire groups of civilians to safety, navigating minefields, patrols, and bombing zones. Their stories rarely reached headlines, yet they shaped the course of local conflicts, saved countless lives, and challenged the world's assumptions about age and heroism. These acts also reveal the darker realities of war. The fact that so many teenagers were in positions of life and death responsibility underscores how total the conflict had become. Childhood was truncated, innocence stolen, and courage forced into the crucible of necessity. Yet amid this tragedy, there emerged moments of inspiration. Teenagers like Lucas, who made decisions that would ripple across history, saving lives in ways adults sometimes could not. By examining these moments, historians gain a fuller picture of the war, not just as a series of battles and campaigns, but as a human story shaped by countless acts of bravery, small and large. Lucas Schneider's 12 Minutes, when placed alongside these untold stories, becomes a lens through which we can understand the extraordinary resilience and capability of young people in the midst of unimaginable pressure. And it forces us to reflect. What drives a 16-year-old to assume command, to risk everything in a world already overwhelmed by death and fear? Perhaps it is a mixture of instinct, necessity, and an unshakable resolve that emerges only when circumstance demands it. Decades later, the men who survived that fateful day spoke of Lucas Schneider with reverence, their voices tinged with awe and something more profound, an enduring memory of fear, hope, and the shock of being led by someone so young. He was like a force of nature, one veteran recalled, his hands trembling slightly as he held an old photograph of the village. We were paralyzed, ready to run, or worse, and then this boy stepped up. We didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but somehow we followed him, and somehow we survived. Another soldier remembered the first moment he realized the boy was not just giving orders, but thinking, anticipating, acting. I saw him sprint across open ground, pulling a man out from the line of fire. I thought, he's going to die, and yet he didn't. He just kept going. We all did what he told us, because he made us believe it was possible. The voices overlap, memories threading together into a tapestry of fear and courage. The terror of being under fire, the deafening cracks of rifles, the whistling of mortar shells, it all comes back vividly. And in each memory, Lucas' presence is the constant, the boy whose youth should have made him fragile, but whose courage made him unshakable. For the soldiers, his actions were not simply heroic, they were transformative. Many spoke of a newfound sense of trust and cohesion in those 12 minutes, a clarity in the chaos that saved lives and preserved hope. One veteran admitted, decades later, that without Lucas, the unit would have collapsed entirely. Others confessed to nightmares of what might have happened had he hesitated, had fear frozen him like it had almost everyone else. Yet there was also a shadow that lingered over these memories. Guilt, survivor's guilt, the heavy knowledge that the boy had carried a burden no one should bear. Soldiers remembered his exhausted face after the battle, the dirt and blood streaked across his cheeks, the small, trembling hands clutching a rifle as if it were an extension of his own courage. They remembered the silence that followed, the quiet in which the enormity of what had happened sank in. Lucas himself rarely spoke of the details. When pressed, he would often focus on the men he could not save, the decisions that weighed heaviest on his conscience, the randomness of life and death in war. Heroism, he seemed to say, was never a reward, it was a responsibility, one he had no choice but to accept. Through these testimonies, we see the duality of Lucas' moment, a fleeting, almost miraculous triumph shadowed by human loss and trauma. The 12 minutes were a spark of clarity in chaos, but they were also a reminder of the immense cost borne by the young and untested. Each memory carries both admiration and sorrow, a testament to the intensity of war experienced through the eyes of a boy forced to be a man in an instant. Even decades later, these soldiers carried his actions with them, engraved not on monuments, but on their own lives. The courage of Lucas Schneider did not end with the battle. It lived on in every life he saved, in every story told by those who witnessed it, in every reflection on the incredible potential of youth under pressure. Lucas Schneider's 12 minutes on the battlefield offer more than a historical anecdote. They reveal enduring truths about courage, leadership, and the capacity for human resilience under unimaginable pressure. Historians and psychologists alike have studied such cases, not merely to catalogue acts of bravery, but to understand how extreme circumstances can awaken extraordinary potential in the young. What made Lucas remarkable was not that he was fearless, he was terrified, but that he acted despite fear. His instincts, sharpened by years of growing up in war, combined with split-second decision-making, allowed him to bridge the gap between chaos and order. Leadership, in its purest form, is about clarity in the storm, and Lucas embodied this principle, showing that age alone does not define capability. His story also challenges our assumptions about adolescence. We often think of teenagers as inexperienced or fragile, yet war repeatedly demonstrates that youth can confront extreme situations with courage, ingenuity, and moral clarity. Across Europe, countless teenagers stepped into roles that demanded these qualities: resistance couriers in France, partisans in Eastern Europe, messengers and scouts on the front lines. Lucas' experience stands out not because he was the only one, but because his actions were decisive, immediate, and documented, leaving a clear imprint on both his comrades and history. The ethical weight of such moments is undeniable. Responsibility thrust upon a child is a cruel facet of war, yet it also reveals a fundamental human truth. In moments of life and death, action often matters more than preparation, and courage can emerge where least expected. Lucas' story reminds us that heroism is not glamorous, it is raw, demanding, and morally complex. In the years following the war, Lucas' life unfolded quietly, but his experience never truly left him. He became a living testament to the idea that leadership is forged in adversity, and that even the smallest or youngest among us can change the course of events when circumstance demands. Veterans who survived that day carried the memory of his command with them, passing down the story not as myth, but as a lesson in resilience, decisiveness, and the power of human spirit. Today, his story resonates beyond military history. It offers insight into the potential of youth, the importance of decisive action in crises, and the ways ordinary people can rise to extraordinary challenges. In classrooms, leadership seminars, and psychological studies of courage, Lucas Schneider serves as a symbol, proof that even in the darkest moments, one person, no matter how young, can make the difference between survival and disaster. Yet perhaps the most profound lesson is human in nature. Courage is contagious. Leadership is not inherited, it is enacted, and the potential for heroism lies dormant in all of us, waiting for the moment when fear is confronted with necessity and instinct is guided by conscience. Lucas' 12 minutes remind us that history is not only written by generals or statesmen, but by those who act decisively when the world demands it. While Lucas Schneider's story is extraordinary, it is far from unique. Across the battlefields, occupied towns, and resistance networks of World War II, countless teenagers performed acts of courage that would rival, or even surpass, those of trained adults. In France, 15-year-old Jean Dubois navigated the forests and ruins of her village to carry secret messages for the resistance. She moved at night, memorizing routes to avoid patrols, and once guided an entire column of civilians through enemy checkpoints. The fear she endured was palpable, yet she acted with precision and determination that saved dozens of lives. In Poland, Tadeusz Kowalski, a 14-year-old courier, delivered intelligence about troop movements while his town was under constant bombardment. He climbed through rubble, past soldiers' checkpoints, and returned home with critical information that allowed partisans to stage a surprise attack. His bravery cost him injuries and left scars he carried for life, but his actions changed the outcome of skirmishes that could have been disastrous. In Germany, beyond Lucas, other youths were thrust into battle or roles of responsibility. Scouts, messengers, even improvised commanders in moments when adults fell or froze. These stories, often buried in archives, letters, and oral histories, reveal a pattern. Extraordinary courage is not bound by age. Under pressure, determination, and moral clarity, teenagers could act decisively when the experienced faltered. The common thread between Lucas and these other young heroes is the human element. They were not trained generals or seasoned soldiers. They were ordinary teenagers responding to extraordinary circumstances. Fear was constant, mistakes could be fatal, and the line between survival and death was razor-thin. Yet time and again, they acted, not for glory, but because the moment demanded it. The war took much from them: childhood, innocence, certainty, and sometimes life itself. But in return, it revealed the astonishing potential for courage, ingenuity, and leadership in even the youngest among us. Lucas Schneider's 12 Minutes and the stories of his peers stand as a testament to this human capacity. They challenge us to reconsider assumptions about age, responsibility, and the depths of bravery. In the end, Lucas' legacy is not measured by medals, reports, or recognition. It is measured in lives saved, the ripple effect of his courage, and the enduring lesson he leaves for all generations. Heroism can emerge anywhere, even in the smallest, youngest, or most unlikely of figures. The boy who held a line for 12 minutes reminds us that history is shaped not only by the expected leaders, but by those who act when action is the only path forward. And perhaps, in remembering these stories, we see a truth both inspiring and sobering. The capacity for courage lies within all of us, waiting for the moment we are tested, and sometimes, history depends on those brave enough to rise before it is too late.